She never had anything to do with the business. Dad handled everything himself. She's not getting a piece of something she didn't build. I was standing in the hallway outside my father's kitchen, still in my coat, still holding the casserole dish I'd brought because I didn't know what else to bring, when I heard my sister say those words. There were at least 6 people in that kitchen. I could hear the low murmur of the room, the particular sound of people arranging themselves around a grief they didn't quite know where to put. I stood in that hallway for 30 seconds, maybe 40. I set the casserole dish on the hall table. I took off my coat. I walked in. I did not say a word about what I had heard. I did not need to. The operating agreement was already filed. It had been filed for 11 years. I just let her finish talking. My name is Fiona Delacroix. I am 34 years old. My father, Roland Delacroix, died on November 9th, 2023, at age 71, at home, in the house where my sister and I grew up, from complications related to the Parkinson's disease he had been diagnosed with 2 years before. He died on a Thursday morning with my mother's rosary on the nightstand and a cup of coffee he had not finished going cold on the dresser, and the business he had spent 22 years building in better financial shape than it had ever been in his life. I want to tell you about that business, and about the 11 years I spent inside it invisibly, and about the December morning in Arthur Boudreau's office when the invisibility ended. But I want to start further back, because the beginning is where the shape of the thing becomes clear, and I am, at heart, an accountant. I need the foundation before I can explain the structure. The Delacroix Grounds and Maintenance was founded by my father in 2001, when I was 12 years old and my sister Deanna was 16. He built it from a truck, a trailer, a used zero-turn mower, and 2 employees he had known from a previous landscaping job. By the time I was in high school, it had grown to a small commercial operation, 7 or 8 employees, a handful of commercial clients. An office that was really a converted garage on the east side of Baton Rouge. My father ran it the way he ran everything, on instinct, on relationship, on a handshake-first philosophy that worked well for winning clients and worked less well for the administrative infrastructure a growing business requires. He was not a numbers person. He knew it. He had been trying to solve for it his entire career. He found his solution in me. I graduated high school in 2007, enrolled in an associate's program in accounting at the community college, and worked part-time for the first 2 years before landing a bookkeeping position at a small accounting firm in Baton Rouge in 2009 at 20 years old. My starting salary was $32,000. My father, who had been quietly watching my relationship with a spreadsheet develop since I was 15 and doing his taxes as a project for a high school accounting class, had been watching me with the particular attention of a man who recognizes in someone else the skill he has always needed. In 2011, the business had a bad year. A major client, a regional medical office park that accounted for roughly 30% of revenue, terminated their contract early after a change in facilities management. The loss was not catastrophic, but it exposed something that had been true for years. The business's financial infrastructure was not built to absorb disruption. The bookkeeping was inconsistent. The receivables were not tracked systematically. There was money that was owed and not collected, and money that was spent without adequate documentation, and a general quality of financial instability that is common in small family businesses run by people who are good at the work, but not at the paperwork behind it. My father called me on a Sunday in March of 2012. He asked me to come over and look at the books. I came over. I looked at the books. I spent 4 hours at his kitchen table with 3 years of bank statements, QuickBooks files that had not been consistently maintained, and a filing system that was, at best, optimistic. At the end of 4 hours, I told him what I found. The business was not insolvent, but it was fragile. There were specific recoverable losses, and the financial architecture needed to be rebuilt from the foundation. He looked at me across the kitchen table. He said, "What would it take to do that right?" I told him I would need access to everything, every account, every contract, every client file. I told him I could rebuild the billing system, create a proper receivables process, do cash flow modeling, and build a financial reporting structure that would let him actually see the health of the business in real time, rather than discovering problems after they had already compounded. I told him it was not a small project. It was a years-long one. He said, "What do you want for it?" I said I wanted to be a partner. He did not hesitate. He said, 40%. Arthur will draw it up. And that was how it was done. Arthur Boudreaux had been handling the Delacroix family's legal matters for 20 years, wills, a property dispute in the 90s, some estate planning for my grandfather. He drafted the operating agreement that spring. It was thorough, it was specific, and it was private. My name appeared as a 40% member. My father's name appeared as the 60% managing member. The document was signed, notarized, and filed. Arthur kept the original. I kept a copy in a fireproof lockbox in my apartment in Baton Rouge. My father came to me after we had signed and said one thing that I want to be precise about, because it governed the next 11 years of my life. He said, "I don't want Deanna to know about this. If she knows you own a piece of this business, she'll spend all her energy managing that instead of managing the front desk. Let me handle Deanna. You handle the numbers." He was not unkind about it. He was not dismissive of Deanna. He was simply accurate about the dynamic, in the way that parents sometimes are about their children when they have been watching them long enough. I said I understood. I kept that agreement for 11 years. I want to explain what those 11 years look like from the inside, because I think it is important to be specific. This is not a story where I sat in the shadows nursing resentment. I was building something. I was genuinely invested in the success of that business, not because it was my legacy or my public identity, but because it was a real enterprise with real employees and a real financial logic that I found, in the way I find all financial logic, deeply engaging. I wanted it to work. I wanted to fix what was broken and build what was missing and see the margins improve, not for the satisfaction of being right, but because the thing itself deserved to be built correctly. In 2012 and 2013, I stabilized the business. The first capital contribution I made was $18,000, my own savings, accumulated over 3 years of careful living on a bookkeeper's salary, which went to cover a short-term cash flow gap while I rebuilt the billing system and began recovering uncollected receivables. I identified approximately $40,000 in outstanding invoices that had been allowed to age past the point of easy collection. I recovered most of it. The business's cash position improved. My father said good work in a room where no one else could hear, which was the primary mode of his appreciation, and which I had learned, early on, to receive as the thing it was. In 2014, I completed my bachelor's degree in accounting, night school, 2 semesters, while working full-time. I received a promotion at the firm where I was working, moving from senior bookkeeper to financial analyst at $54,000 a year. I began making structured annual capital contributions to Delacroix grounds, smaller amounts between $8,000 and $12,000, indexed to the business's growth needs in a given year. My father and I talked on the phone every 2 weeks. We talked about the business. Sometimes we talked about other things. I want to tell you about Deanna, because I have been avoiding it and I should not. Deanna is my older sister by 4 years. She is 38 years old now. She is, in the way that some people are, very good at the surface of things, at the performance of warmth, at the management of social appearances, at the cultivation of a narrative that reflects well on her. She has a 4-bedroom house in a suburb of Baton Rouge that she and her husband, Troy, bought in 2018, and a timeshare in Gulf Shores, and a Facebook presence that emphasizes family closeness and faith, and what she has always called, with a frequency that increased noticeably after my father's health began declining, the Delacroix way. I am not being uncharitable. I am describing what is true about her, which is that she understood, before I did, the value of the public story. She just did not understand that the public story is not the only story that matters. She began working the front desk at Delacroix grounds in 2015, 30s a week, answering phones, scheduling client appointments, ordering supplies. She was good at it. She was personable on the phone and clients liked her, and she had a genuine warmth in face-to-face interactions that I do not have and do not pretend to have. What she was not good at, and what she did not understand about her own role, was the difference between being the face of something and being the foundation of it. In 2012, the year I signed the operating agreement, Deanna said at a Sunday dinner, "Dad, Fiona's a bookkeeper. She's not a businesswoman. You need someone who understands people, not spreadsheets." My father said nothing. He had signed the operating agreement 2 weeks prior. I passed the bread. I want to tell you what it was like to sit at those dinners across the next decade, not because I want your sympathy. I made a choice when I signed that agreement and I do not regret it, but because I think precision requires me to name the specific experience of being repeatedly described in front of people you love as something lesser than what you are. It is not dramatic exactly. It does not arrive all at once. It accumulates. Dinner by dinner, group text by group text, Facebook post by Facebook post. The story calcifies. Deanna runs the business. Fiona helps with the numbers. Their father built it with his own hands and his own vision and his 2 daughters' love. It is a nice story. It is not true. But it had 11 years to become the truth that everyone in my family believed, and there was no moment in which I was allowed to correct it. The 2018 contract is the one I want to tell you about in specific detail, because it illustrates the shape of the thing better than anything else I can give you. In mid-2017, I identified a significant opportunity. A regional retail park on the south side of Baton Rouge was putting its commercial grounds maintenance contract out to bid. The contract was for a 3-year term with annual renewable options. The projected annual value was $160,000. It was by far the most substantial commercial contract Delacroix Grounds had ever pursued. I spent 4 months on the financial proposal. I built a cost model from the ground up: labor, equipment, materials, overhead allocation, contingency. I researched the competitive landscape, identified the likely bid range, and priced our proposal to be competitive at margin without undercutting to a point that would compromise quality. I identified a gap in our equipment capacity and recommended a capital investment, $22,000 of my own money, to fund the lease of 2 additional commercial mowers needed to service the contract if we won. I wrote the financial sections of the proposal. I built a supporting documentation. My father presented the proposal. He and Deanna attended the signing meeting with the retail park's facilities manager. I had a work obligation that day, a client audit I could not reschedule. I told my father I would be there in spirit. The photograph Deanna sent to the family group text shows her and my father standing with the facilities manager, smiling in front of the retail park's main entrance. The caption said, "So proud of what we've built together as a family." The text she sent the family said, "We got the contract. This is what the Delacroix way looks like. So grateful for Dad and for everyone who believed in us. I am not in the photograph. My name is not in the text." The $22,000 I contributed to make the bid viable is not mentioned. I read the text sitting at my desk at the accounting firm at 6:15 in the evening after a full day's work, and I thought, this is the story she is telling. And then I went home and made dinner and called my father, who said, "We got it. Good work on the numbers," in a room where no one else could hear. That was the rhythm of it. That was 11 years. In 2019, Arthur updated the operating agreement to reflect the capital account balances that had accumulated. My total contributions at that point were approximately $62,000. The agreement was updated, signed by both my father and me, filed. Deanna was not informed. She did not ask. In 2021, my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He was 69. The diagnosis was early stage, and his neurologist was cautiously optimistic about the management timeline. But my father was not a man who needed to be told twice that time was a finite resource. He called Arthur within a month of the diagnosis. He updated his will. He structured the succession explicitly. His 60% ownership stake in Delacroix Grounds would be divided equally between his 2 daughters upon his death, 30% to each, subject in all cases to the terms of the existing operating agreement. He did not tell Deanna about the will specifics. He told me, "Everything is in order. You won't have to fight for anything." I believed him. I had always believed him when he said things that were legally documented. Deanna, that same year, began positioning herself at every family occasion as the natural successor. At a Sunday dinner in late 2021, with aunts and cousins and my parents and me at the table, she said, "I've been the one holding this together while Dad's been slowing down. Everyone knows that. Fiona has her own career. She doesn't need this." My father looked at the table. He said, "We'll make sure everything is handled right." He did not say it as a promise to Deanna. He said it as a statement of fact, addressed to no one in particular, in the tone of a man who has already taken the necessary steps. Deanna heard it as agreement. It was not agreement. It was confirmation of something she was not in the room for when it was established. I want to tell you about the last time I visited my father before he died, because it is not dramatic and it is not the scene you might expect, and I think it deserves to be told precisely. It was October of 2023. His Parkinson's had progressed. He was still at home, still himself in the ways that mattered, but slower and more tired than the version of him I had been watching decline across 2 years. I drove out on a Saturday morning. We sat on the back porch. He had a cup of coffee. I had a cup of coffee. The yard was doing what Louisiana yards do in October, not quite surrendering to fall, still holding on to green with a kind of stubborn regional humidity. We talked about the business. He asked me about a client account I had been restructuring. I told him it was in good shape. He nodded. He said toward the end of the morning, "Deanna's going to be upset." I said I knew. He said, "You'll handle it the right way." I said I would try. He said, "Arthur has everything." As if I didn't know. As if he needed to say it anyway. I think he did need to say it. I think it was the closest he knew how to come to. I'm sorry I couldn't give you this out loud. I'm sorry I couldn't say your name in the room. I did what I could do in the language I had. He died 6 weeks later. Thursday, November 9th. I got the call at 6:45 in the morning. I drove to the house. Deanna was already there. By the time the sun was fully up, she had begun making calls. The hallway moment happened 3 days later at the gathering at the house. I arrived at 2 in the afternoon with a casserole dish because I am a person who, in a crisis, defaults to the practical thing, and the practical thing when people are grieving is to bring food. I came in from the driveway. The front door was unlocked. I heard voices in the kitchen. I heard my sister's voice, specifically at a register I recognized, the register she uses when she is performing certainty for an audience. I heard the words. She never had anything to do with the business. Dad handled everything himself. She's not getting a piece of something she didn't build. 30 seconds in the hallway, the casserole dish on the table, the coat on the hook, the walk into the kitchen. I want to be honest about what I felt in that hallway, because I have been asked, and because I think the honest answer is more interesting than the satisfying one. I did not feel rage. I did not feel vindicated. That would come later, and even then it was quieter than I expected. What I felt in that hallway was something closer to exhaustion and recognition combined. The specific feeling of a thing you have known for a very long time being said out loud for what you understand is the last time it will ever be said without consequence. She had said versions of it for 11 years. She was saying it now, 3 days after our father's death, in his kitchen, with a casserole dish in my hands. Because she genuinely believed it was true. That was the part that required the most careful handling. Not the anger, but the fact that she believed it. She had been allowed to believe it for so long that it had become indistinguishable from her reality. My father and I had built that. We had done it deliberately. And now I was standing in the hallway, living inside the consequence of our own discretion. I walked in. I said hello. I hugged the people who needed hugging. I put the casserole in the kitchen. I sat in the living room with my mother's sister for an hour and talked about my father in the ways that people talk about the dead. when the death is still too recent to be anything other than raw and immediate. I did not look at Deanna more than necessary. She did not look at me more than she had to. We existed in the same house for 2 hours with the specific quality of distance that had characterized our relationship for most of our adult lives. Not hostile, not warm. Separated by the 11 years of a story that was about to end. Arthur Boudreau called 12 days after the funeral. He called both of us separately on the same morning to inform us that the estate was entering probate and that we were both named in the will. He requested our presence at his office the following Wednesday. He did not tell either of us more than that. I did not need more than that. I knew what Wednesday would contain. I want to describe Arthur's office because the setting matters for what happens in it. It is a small law office in downtown Baton Rouge. Wood-paneled walls, diplomas, a window that looks out onto the concrete face of a parking structure across the street. The furniture is old and deliberate, the kind of furniture that communicates longevity and trust. Arthur himself is 67, white-haired, unhurried in the way of men who have been doing one thing well for 40 years and have no reason to rush any part of it. He has known Deanna and me since we were children. He attended our father's funeral. He is not a performative man. He was not going to make this a performance. We sat across from each other at the conference table. Deanna had dressed carefully. She always dresses carefully for occasions she has decided are significant. She had her phone face down on the table. She looked, I thought, like a woman who had come to receive something she considered overdue. I had dressed the way I always dress for professional meetings. A blouse in rust-colored linen, dark slacks, flat shoes. I had my own copy of the operating agreement in my bag. I did not take it out. Arthur read the will. He read it clearly and without commentary. The bequests, the distribution of personal property, the real estate, my mother's provisions. He read the section pertaining to the business. He read the language about the 60% stake being divided equally between both daughters, subject to any existing ownership agreements governing the company. Then he paused. He said, "Before we discuss distribution of the estate, there is an existing business document that governs the company's ownership structure." He opened a folder. He placed 2 copies of the operating agreement on the table, one in front of each of us. I already knew every word of it. I had read it perhaps 30 times in 11 years, not because I doubted its contents, but because I am an accountant and I do not leave important documents unreviewed. I did not look down at my copy. I watched my sister. She picked up the document. She read the title. She turned to the first page. She read. She turned to the second page. She read more slowly. I could see the moment, the precise, visible moment when she reached the signature block. Her father's signature. His handwriting, which she had known her whole life. Fiona M. Delacroix, dated February 14, 2012. Updated September 3, 2019. Updated November 18, 2022. She said, where did this even come from? This isn't, Dad would have told me. Arthur said, gently but without hesitation, your father chose to structure the partnership privately. That was his right as a business owner. The agreement is formally executed and legally binding. Deanna looked at me. It was one of 2 times she looked directly at me during that meeting. Her face in that moment, I want to be precise about this because I have thought about it many times since, was not the face of a villain receiving punishment. It was the face of a person whose understanding of their own life has just been structurally revised and who has not yet located the footing on the other side of that revision. The anger would come. In that moment, there was just the strange, specific stillness of collapse. She looked back at Arthur. She said, what does this mean, exactly? Arthur explained the math. Her father's 60% stake, divided equally, gave her 30%. My existing 40% stake, plus my inherited 30%, gave me 70% of the business. Deanna, who had come to that office expecting to receive a company generating $1.1 million in annual revenue, left that office with 30% of one. I owned the rest. Arthur also noted, and I want to include this because it is relevant to understanding what my father had built, that my capital account, reflecting 11 years of contributions and reinvestment, totaled just over $94,000, and that under the terms of the agreement, this capital was mine to be repaid before any dissolution proceeds were distributed. He noted this not to be theatrical, but because it was in the document, and the document was what we were there to discuss. There was not much more to say after that. Deanna asked 2 or 3 questions. Arthur answered them. I answered one question that was addressed to me directly, about the timeline for probate, and I gave the accurate answer and did not add anything to it. We signed what needed to be signed. I thanked Arthur. I stood up. In the parking lot, Deanna caught up to me. She had been moving quickly, her heels on the concrete, and I heard her before I saw her. I stopped walking. I turned. She said, "You could have told me." I looked at her. I thought about everything I could have said. I thought about the Sunday dinner in 2012, and the group text in 2018, and the dinner in 2021 where she said I didn't need the business, and my father looked at the table and said nothing. I thought about the hallway and the casserole dish and the 30 seconds in the hall where I stood and listened to her tell a room full of people that I hadn't built anything. I said, "Dad asked me not to." I kept my word. I got in my car. I drove back to my apartment. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the wall for a while and thought about my father, who had died 6 weeks prior with his coffee going cold on the dresser, and who had loved me in the only language he fully spoke, the quiet, documented, legally binding language of paperwork and trust. And I let myself grieve him in the specific way that had not been available to me in the weeks since his death, which had been crowded with logistics and family and the particular management of other people's grief. I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not for the business, for him, for the October morning on the back porch, for Arthur has everything, and what it cost him to say it like that. As if it were a practical matter, as if it were not the fullest declaration of faith he knew how to make. 1 week after the probate meeting, I called a staff meeting at the Delacroix grounds office. 11 employees, 3 crew supervisors who had been with the company for over a decade. I walked in. I had been in that office hundreds of times, but always as the owner's daughter who helped with paperwork, which is to say, I had been in that office as a ghost of myself for 11 years. And I stood at the front of the room and introduced myself as the majority owner. I told them my name was on the operating agreement. I told them it had been there since 2012. I told them operations would continue without interruption and that every person in that room had a job for as long as they wanted one. One of the supervisors, a man named Gerald, who had been with the company for 14 years and who I had watched grow from a crew member into the most reliable operational leader in the business, nodded slowly after I finished speaking. He said, "Mr. Delacroix always said the business was in good hands. I guess now I know what he meant." He had not known about the operating agreement. He had known about the hands. I want to stop here because there is something I need to say about my father's choice. Not to defend it, but to understand it, because I have spent a year doing that work and I think it deserves to be done precisely. He chose to keep my partnership private. He did it for reasons that were practical, and also, I think, for reasons that were protective. Of me, yes, but also of Deanna, and of the version of the family he wanted to believe was possible. He could not fix the dynamic. He could not make Deanna see me. He had tried in the early years, and what he learned was that trying required a confrontation that cost more than it produced. So he did what he could do. He called Arthur. He signed documents. He said good work in rooms where no one else was listening. He built me a foundation and trusted me to stand on it after he was gone. I used to grieve what he could not give me in public. I spent years sitting across from Deanna at those dinners thinking, why won't he just say it? Say my name. Say what I am to this business. Give me that one visible thing. He never did, but he was saying it. He was saying it every single time he picked up the phone to call Arthur, every time he reviewed the updated agreement and signed his name beside mine, every time he looked at the balance sheet I built and said those 2 words in a room where no one else could hear. That was his love language. Paperwork and trust. It took me until I was 34 and sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee to understand it fluently. Now I speak it as naturally as he did. I want to tell you where things are now, because I do not think stories like this end cleanly, and I do not want to pretend this one does. Deanna retained her 30% stake. She has not returned to working at the office in any regular capacity. For the first 6 weeks after the probate meeting, she did not come in at all. When she returned, she was not the same person who had answered the phones for 8 years. She did not know what her role was. I did not define it for her. I told her in a single brief conversation in January of 2024 that she was welcome to find a role that worked, that I valued her client relationships and her knowledge of the operations, but that the business would be run according to the operating agreement, and that decisions requiring a majority would require my approval. She heard this. She did not respond. She left. We did not speak about anything other than business necessities for most of 2024. In late autumn, her husband Troy sent me a text. Troy and I have never been close, but he is, I think, a fundamentally decent man who found himself in the middle of something he didn't fully understand and tried to do the right thing with limited information. His text said that Deanna had been struggling, that he thought she wanted to talk but didn't know how, and that he hoped Fiona might be open to it. I read the text on a Tuesday morning and I put my phone face down and I thought about it for 4 days. Then I texted back, "She can call me when she's ready. I'm not going anywhere. She has not called yet. I believe she will. I am not organizing my life around when." I hired a general manager in early 2024, a woman with a strong operations background who came recommended through an industry contact to handle the day-to-day management of the business. This freed me from the invisible labor I had been performing for 11 years. For the first time, I took a proper salary, $120,000 annually, drawn from the business in the ordinary way, appearing on a company document with my name attached, visible to anyone who looks at the payroll. It is the first time my name has appeared on a company document that was not a private legal filing. I moved into my father's office. I did not redecorate. I moved nothing. His calendar is still on his desk, open to November 2023. I have been asked why I leave it there, and I do not have a clean answer. It is not a performance. It is not a shrine. It is closer to the feeling of wanting something solid to remain still for a while before the motion resumes. My father built something in that office for 22 years. I am not in a hurry to replace the evidence of that with the evidence of what comes next. There is one more thing I want to tell you, and it is the thing I find myself returning to most often when I think about these 11 years. I was in the hallway of my father's house, 3 days after he died, holding a casserole dish, listening to my sister tell a room full of people that I had not built anything. I want to be specific about what I felt in that moment, not the part I described at the beginning, the exhaustion and recognition, but the part underneath that. The part that is harder to name. It was not satisfaction. It was not even vindication. It was something quieter, and something that I think only people who have spent years building something invisible will recognize. It was the specific feeling of knowing that the thing you built is real, regardless of whether anyone in the room has seen it. The operating agreement was not in my hands in that hallway. It was in Arthur Boudreau's filing cabinet 8 miles away, filed under Delacroix Grounds and Maintenance, alongside 2 amended versions that had been updated in 2019 and 2022 with the same methodical care. It was in my fireproof lockbox. It was in the language of the will my father had written 2 years before he died. It did not need to be in the hallway. The hallway was for casserole dishes and grief, and the stories people tell when they think no one is listening. The operating agreement was somewhere more durable than that. It was in the record. My sister thought she took the business the day my father died. But the truth is she never had it. You cannot take what was never yours to begin with, and a signature is a harder thing to argue with than a story. If you are watching this and you have built something in silence, something real, something documented, something that exists in the world independently of whether anyone around you has acknowledged it, I want to ask you something. Did someone in your family ever claim credit for what you built? Did they tell the room a story that wasn't true? And did the truth ever come out, or are you still waiting for it? Because I waited 11 years. And I want you to know, the paperwork keeps, the record keeps. Whatever you have built in silence, if it was built correctly, if it was done with care and documented with precision, it will still be there when the room is finally ready to look at it. Subscribe if you want to be here when I keep figuring out what comes after. Because the office is mine now, and the calendar is still on November, and I am, for the first time in 11 years, allowed to put my name on things. And I intend to.